Good afternoon. The Coalition of the African American Museum Library in Oakland is preserving your life story for history. Why don't you start by having you introduce yourself?
My name is Samuel Golden.
And where were you born, Mr. Golden?
I was born in Altimer, Arkansas, just outside of Pine Bluff, Arkansas.
And how long did you live there?
My folks left there when I was 6 months old, and we moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And how long did you stay in Albuquerque, New Mexico?
Until I was almost 5 years old. I made 5 on the train coming to Oakland in 1926.
1926?
Yeah.
Where did you live when you came to Oakland?
2836 Myrtle Street in Oakland.
I see. And did you start school in Oakland?
Yes, I did. I started at Clawson School, then I transferred over to Longfellow Grammar School.
Is Clawson still a school in Oakland now, or is it another school, or what?
No, I think it's a senior citizens home now.
Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother here in Oakland, and I had another half-brother lived in Chicago.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go to elementary school again?
I went to Clawson Elementary School and to Longfellow Elementary School.
And then where did you go to high school?
Well, I went to junior high school first. I went to Hoover Junior High School. Then I went to University High School after that, and I graduated.
Where's University High School?
University High School is where the old Merritt campus used to be, on 58th and Grove.
Now, was it integrated at that time?
It was integrated, but there wasn't too many blacks at that school.
Is that right?
It was called, they called it Flunker's Paradise, because the only 2 subjects you had to take, that was English and gym. But they had, they had 8 different foreign languages. You could take Latin and Italian and a lot of other stuff. You also take bridge, take singing. And it was part of the University of California.
So what did you take when you were there?
I took a business course.
Is that right? Did you play any sports when you were there?
Yes, I did. I ran track, and I also played football for University High School.
Were you any good?
Well, in track I was. Yeah, we won the OEL championship in 1939.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Did you do anything in music?
Not really. I took a course in music there at Uni, and I did a little singing around the Bay Area here, just for my own, sake.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. And what happened after you graduated from university?
When I graduated in June of 1940, I went to City College, San Francisco, and I stayed there for a couple years. I played basketball for them on the varsity. And then I transferred over to the University of California at Berkeley.
And what did you take there?
A biz ed course at the University of Berkeley.
Did you spend any time in the military at all?
Yes, I did. I went in the Army on February the 23rd, 1943. They sent me down to Monterey. There was a group of us went down there together. And they really didn't know what to do with me because I was limited service. I had an injury from football.
I see. So did you have to go any place when you were there?
Yeah, I stayed in Monterey for about a week, and they shipped me to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And when I got there, I found that just about all the guys from Berkeley and Oakland and San Francisco were there in that outfit. It was a 780 MP outfit.
And how long did you stay in the service?
I stayed in service until November of 45.
And then you came back to Oakland after that?
Oh, yes. I came back to Oakland and Berkeley. Mm-hmm.
What did you do then?
Well, at that time, I came back. I was working at the VA in San Francisco, and I was at a GS2 or whatever it was, way at the bottom of the ladder. And then I talked to a friend of mine. She was hiring over at the Naval Naval Supply Center in Oakland. So I transferred over here so I could save the money from that commute across the bridge. It made a big difference in those days.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And how long did you stay there?
Well, I worked at the Naval Supply Center until, actually till June 1st of 1949 is when I worked there. And that's when I was called to go into the fire department.
I see.
But I had...
Excuse me.
I had a few problems down there. My supervisor was a lady in the storage area, and they were taking all the women out of the storage area and putting them over in the office. And so the floor supervisor gave me her job. but the building superintendent didn't want me to have that job, so he gave it to one of the guys that was under me. And that's when I sort of got mad and walked the table and a little few things. And good thing, because they were getting ready to fire me, and the fire department called me to go to work with them.
Is that right? Well, what about in college? I'm just wondering how many blacks, how many students were in college when you were there, or were there many?
Well, actually, there wasn't that many blacks in the whole Bay Area in 1940. If I remember correctly, it was only about 5,000 in the whole Bay Area. And they didn't start coming here until the war, when the war started. Then a lot of blacks came here to work.
Mm-hmm. So there weren't many in your classes in college or in your workplaces?
In most of my classes, I was either the only one or it might have been one or two of us. And actually, in my graduating class, I think there was only 8 in the whole graduating class from University High School.
University High School.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now, tell me, did you do anything before you got called to the fire department? Were you working anyplace else? I mean, you told me about the across the bay jobs, but did you do anything else?
Yeah, before I went into the service, I was working at Kaiser Shipyard. I was a welder out there. And you had to join the union, but you couldn't join the welders union, though. So they created a separate union called the Boilermakers, so that all the blacks, regardless of what union you should have been in, you went to that union. And that was on 7th Street, the Boilermakers Union.
So all the blacks were in the
Boilermakers Union, yeah.
No matter what?
Unless it was the Laborers Union, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now, did you do anything else before you got called to the fire department? Did you do any other jobs or have any other activities?
Well, I was a paper boy. I started working, I think I was about 12 years old. And from the time I started working, I think I always had a job until I retired when I was 65.
Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, tell me about the fire department. How did you get involved, or what inspired you, or how did you get into the fire department?
Well, a friend of mine, Burl Smith, he was going to classes down at the firehouse. It was an all-black firehouse on 34th and Magnolia Street. And Lieutenant Royal Towns was teaching the class, and he talked me into going down there and sitting in the class. So I went down there for a couple of weeks and studied under Towns. And I was fortunate enough to take the examination and get high enough to be hired.
And did you come right away to the fire department, or did you?
Well, the examination was in 1948, and I wasn't hired until June 1st of 1949. So it was a little wait in between.
What did you do during that wait?
That's when I was working down to Naval Supply Center.
I see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, who was the mayor when you came into the fire department? Do you remember who the mayor was at that time?
Well, they didn't have a strong mayor. His name was Rochelle. They sort of rotated the mayor's position on the council in those days.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when you came in, there had already been some blacks in the fire department?
Yes, the first blacks came in 1920. There was one that came in, and they didn't know what to do with him, so they put him at the pumping station down at Lake Merritt until they could get 2 more. And when those 2 came in, they made 3, and they put them at the old 12 engines on 8th and Alice. They were there. And on one shift, you had the 3 blacks, and on the other shift, you had all white. And then in 1925, they built a new firehouse at 34th and Magnolia, and that's where they sent all the blacks after that time.
So all the blacks went to that one firehouse?
That was that one firehouse.
So when you came into the fire department, was it still the same way? Was it still
well, it was segregated when I came in. As a matter of fact, 22 engine, that was the one that was the 34th and Magnolia. It was a 5-person company. You're supposed to have 5 men on each piece of apparatus. And in that house, when I came in, we had 12 on one shift and 13 on the other shift. And after a while, the auditor couldn't justify it, so they opened up 2 more all-black houses up in the hills for us, 33 engine and 28 engine. Mm-hmm.
So approximately how many blacks were in the fire department when you came in 1940?
49.
49. How many blacks were in there?
Well, there was about 18 when I came in. And then when they started breaking up the firehouse and opening the others, there was 25 of us there.
so when did they start integrating the firehouses?
Well, in 1948, just before I came in, uh, let me back up a little bit. C.L. Dellums and Trio Pittman was trying to get them to integrate the fire department. And they put enough pressure on the city manager where what they did, they came to 22 engine, got the lightest, the brightest guy they could find, and sent him down to one of the firehouses down there in West Oakland. It was 9 engine. But they treated him so bad down there, and it was ridiculous, you know. And it turned out that was the mayor's brother-in-law that they sent down there, Mayor Wilson's brother-in-law they sent down there. And he asked to come back to the 22 engine because it was really tough.
So how long was it before you went to a integrated firehouse?
Well, I came in 49. In 1951, they sent me to 24 engine up in Montclair. I was on one shift, and another fellow, Kenneth Hernandez, was on the other shift. And in those days, what they did, they call it a hotbed. They'd always send 2 to the house and put 1 on each shift, but they had to sleep in the same bed because the whites didn't want to sleep in the same bed with you. And then when we were on watch, everybody had to take their turn at nighttime being on watch. We had to bring our mattress out from our bed and put it on the watch bed because they didn't want to sleep on the same mattress with us.
Well, how about the eating arrangements?
Well, the eating arrangement at that particular house, it was different than in other houses. One of the fellows called me before I went there and asked me if I wanted to eat with him, and I said yes. But then after we really integrated the department in 1955, they sent blacks to all the other firehouses, and they wouldn't eat with us. And they made us take our mattresses and put them on the watch bed, and there was 2 guys sent to each house on each shift to sleep in the same bed.
So there was a time when you actually did not eat in the same dining room, didn't eat with the white firemen?
Right, and not at the same time. As a matter of fact, sometime my wife had to bring my dinner to me, you know, and at one point there, the guys, the firefighters, up until about 1955, they had to buy all their own utensils, pots, pans, and refrigerators and everything else. Each house bought their own. But when they integrated us at that time, the white guys didn't want us to use their refrigerators. And so the city had to start buying refrigerators for all the firehouses, and everybody could use them.
So let me get this straight. You mean to tell me that the black firemen couldn't put their food in the refrigerators at that time?
That's correct. We couldn't do it.
Well, what did they do with their food then?
They put their food in their refrigerators.
But I mean, what did the black firefighters do if they couldn't put their food in the refrigerator?
My wife would bring me my food, either one of those frozen dinners or something, you know, and I'd heat it up.
And the utensils, there was one time when you could not use the same utensils as the white firefighters?
Right. They started out that way, but then it was pointed out to the chief that the house where we were, they sent whites there, and they were using the utensils that we bought. And if they could use the utensils that we bought, we should be able to use the utensils that they bought. And so the chief put his foot down, so to speak, and we started using their utensils.
Now,
it was either that or they had to take them out of the firehouse.
I see. So then everybody could use all the same utensils at one point in time. Now, how was it when you actually went to fight fires? I understood the separation or somewhat separation in the firehouse, but how about when you fought fires?
Well, when we fought fires, that was different. Everybody did their job. And one thing for certain is that the black guys under Lieutenant Towns and under Captain Taylor, they really knew their job because they trained us every day. We drilled every day down there. And when we went out to the other firehouses, we actually were better firefighters than they were. And so we had no problem in doing our job.
And did the white firefighters acted as a team also? In other words, when you were all together to fight a fire, it was a team effort at that time?
Yeah, at the fire, yes. But when we got back to the firehouse, it was different. They wouldn't even talk to us.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, did that ever change? I mean, as more black firemen came in, was there any change in sort of the attitude with the firemen?
The attitude didn't change until some of the younger white firemen started coming in. And they were more, I guess, liberal than the old guard, so to speak. And they started speaking to us. And after some of the old guard, retired and left, then things began to change.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
So now, what about moving up in the ranks for blacks? What was that like, or when did anybody start moving up in the ranks?
Well, that was tough. The first promotion in the fire department was Roy Treese. He was promoted to engineer back in the early 30s. And he was the only promotion that they had at 22 engine. Then later on, Pat Taylor was promoted to lieutenant at 22 engine. He was the first black lieutenant that we ever had. And then later on, Royal Towns made lieutenant, and Pat Taylor made captain. He was the first black captain also, Pat Taylor was.
When was that?
That was 1949, the year I came in. He made captain, 1949.
So, and that was the highest rank that anybody had?
Had at that time.
At that time.
Until 1973, when I made battalion chief. I was the first black battalion chief that they had.
So how was it when you were coming up, being a lieutenant and an engineer and all? Did you have problems then, or was there resentment, or?
Well, there was some resentment, but being the officer in charge, I had the power of the pen, and I had to make out their evaluations. And if they didn't act right, they got a bad evaluation. And some of them got fired behind it.
I see. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm just, what was your motivation to keep going up the ranks? In other words, there's some others had been up to captain, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Was your intent to be the fire chief at one point in time, or were you just going to go see as far as you could go?
No, I was hoping that I could reach the rank of lieutenant in the fire department, and that's what I was striving for. And for a long, long time, there was a couple of us, Burl Smith and Milo Gaston. We used to take all the examinations, and we would always end up down near the bottom of the list. And took an examination for a chief's operator. That's the guy that drives the chief to and from fires, and he usually takes one part of the fire, and the chief takes the front of the fire, and he makes out the reports. I took that examination, and I got an 87 on the written part of the examination. I thought I did pretty good. But when I went to check my paper, the other guys down there, it was 600 questions. The other guys down there missed 1 and 2 questions. They had all the answers to the test to begin with. And they were moaning and crying because they only missed 1 or 2 questions.
I see.
And I got an 87. And they were crying. They had 99.9% on the test, 98.9.
So what did you do about that?
Well, there wasn't anything I could do about that until some years later. I was fortunate enough first to make engineer in 1958, and they sent me to the house where the union president was. And see, the house that I came for, I couldn't eat with him, and I had the special bed I had to sleep in. But when I got to this house, the lieutenant called me and said, "Hey, you want to eat with us?" I said, "Yeah." He called the other guys in and said, "Sam's going to eat with us." That was the end of it.
That was it?
That was it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what happened, or what was the change that you eventually got near the top of the list, in other words, to be captain and all?
Oh, that was after, well, this union president, he got me involved with the union also at that time. And I ran for the office, and I didn't make it. I was like first runner-up. Then one guy missed 3 meetings, and so he kicked him off the board and put me on the board, on the union board, executive board. And the first meeting that I went to, he nominated me to be chairman of the board, and I was elected. I was chairman of the executive board for 10 years. And during that time, well, part of my job was to attend the Civil Service Board meetings. And in doing so, I got the Civil Service Board to change their procedure. Instead of having 95% repeat questions, that they have all new items every time they took a test. The personnel director didn't like it, but the board did that. And so when I took like the captain's examination, I came out number 3 on the list. And when I took the battalion chief's exam, I came out number 1 on the list.
So with the change of the exam with different questions, then it wasn't, the other firefighters didn't have any advantage in having the old tests and that sort of thing.
That's right.
So it made the whole
Because
process.
all they were doing is studying the questions. They had all the answers to all the questions, and when you give an examination, 95% of the questions are repeats. They had all the answers. But when they changed it and had all new questions, they didn't have the answers anymore.
You didn't get a lot of resistance to changing that around?
Well, see, they didn't know I did it. The Civil Service Board is the one that did it.
I see. And the Civil Service Board didn't realize.
Oh, the Civil Service Board did. As a matter of fact, what's his name? Attorney White. He was on the Civil Service Board at that time.
Clint? Is that Clint? What, Clint?
And no, the other White. I can't think of his name. He was killed in an automobile accident up on Skyline Boulevard. But anyway, he was on the Civil Service Board. And also Mrs. Manyweather's daughter was on the board. And it's a 5-person board. And they helped push it through.
I see.
You know. Mm-hmm.
So now when you became captain, how long was it, or the next grade after captain was the...
It was battalion chief.
Battalion chief.
Yeah. But when I became captain, they sent me to a double house. I had a truck and an engine company under me at that time. And up until that time, I had never worked on a truck because all of the truck companies were manned by whites. That was sort of a plush job to have. And none of the blacks were on the trucks until about 1955.
So that when you say not on the trucks, we weren't driving them and weren't on them at all?
They didn't even work on them. They were working on the engine company.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And it wasn't until Chief Sweeney sent some of the blacks to some of the truck companies after that. Mm-hmm.
So you all didn't have any experience on, I mean, not only were you not assigned, did you have experience on how to...
Not on a truck.
On trucks?
Yeah. Now, see, I was in the department for 38 years. I have never worked on a truck.
Is that right?
Never have, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, now after the battalion chief, what takes place becoming the chief? What happens after that?
Well, becoming the chief is more or less a political job. And the time that I spent working with the union, I met a lot of the city council people and the city manager and a lot of other people. I knew them because I was always negotiating with the city manager's office, you know, for salary raises and things like that. And so when it came time for the examination, not the examination, for the interviews for that, I got a call from the city manager at that time was Dave Self. And he called me. I was working out at 7 Chief. He said he thanked me for applying, but that he decided to hire 2 guys from the outside. But then the guys from the outside, when they came here, one was a good friend of mine from Richmond, Virginia. He said he didn't want the job. He just came out here to see me, you know, because we were friends in the same organization. And he went back and he wrote a long letter telling the city manager he didn't want the job, and he sent me a copy of the letter that he sent to the city manager. And then the other fellow he was out of Compton, I believe. He wanted to get a loan from the city in order to move up here. He wanted the city to give him a loan, and they couldn't do that. And then in the meantime, the city managers changed, and Henry Gardner became the city manager in Oakland. And the first thing he did was to appoint me, even after Dave Self said that, you know, it told me that thanks, but no thanks. And Henry appointed me. Actually, I got a call when I was out at 7 Chief from the assistant to the city manager. Said he wanted to talk to me, to come in the next day. I told him, well, I had to go home and change clothes, and I could get in about 10 o'clock. He said, well, fine. Then when I got there, he told me, well, the city manager wanted to see me. And so when I went in the city manager's office, Henry Gardner was there and Dave Self was there. And they were talking to me and asking me some questions. And then Henry left the room for some reason, And then Dave said, "Oh yeah, by the way, Henry, I want you to be the chief." I almost fell off the chair. That's how I got it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, what was Dave Self's position at that time?
City manager.
He was a city manager.
Yeah, he used to be the city attorney, but when Lionel Wilson was the mayor at that time, and he appointed Dave, or convinced Dave to be the city manager. But Dave didn't like that job. And so he stepped down about the time that I got appointed.
And what year was that now?
That was in 1981. As a matter of fact, Henry didn't take office until July of 81, but he appointed me in March 26th of 81, before he became city manager, actually.
I see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, was there much conversation? Was it in the paper? Was there...
Oh, yeah, it was in the paper. As a matter of fact, there's a picture back there on the wall that the Tribune took of me and my wife. They came out here and took a picture of us, and that was in the paper. But then we had a fellow that was acting chief, and at that time, and he was a little upset because he was part of the group that didn't get appointed, you know. And so he left and went home that day, and I told the city manager, you know, you go tell him that I'm the chief, because first he wanted me to go down there and tell the guy, well, I'm the new chief. I said, no, that's not right. You should go down there and tell him. So he went down there and told him.
And then was there anything done or said after that?
Well, there wasn't too much they could say. The city manager had already appointed me, and I was the guy.
Now, at that point in time, how many blacks were in the fire department at that time?
I think at that time we had about 40-something at that time.
Out of a total number of?
I had 728 firefighters in the department. Plus we had the civilian staff.
How did the rest of the fire department receive you as the chief?
Well, they were sort of disappointed because they knew what my position was and what my attitude was on affirmative action. And they were a little upset about it.
Right.
But it wasn't a thing they could do about it. No, because I was their boss.
So how long were you the chief?
Well, I stayed as long as I could. I had to retire when I was 65.
Is that right?
So that was a total of 6 years.
6 years?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, did we have any increase in black firefighters during the 6 years you were there?
Oh, yeah. Right now, there's about 150 black firefighters. But see, the fire department is not as big as it was when I was chief. They're down to about 475 firefighters now in the city of Oakland.
Is that right?
Yeah, and see, when I was chief, we had 40 engines and truck companies. They're down to about 28, somewhere around there now.
So we have a larger population, but we have fewer firemen.
Yeah, but budgets.
Budgets.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't encounter anything pretty much when you were the chief? It was because you were the chief, there was not much.
It wasn't too much they could do about it, you know. And I had a couple assistant chiefs that were really good. There was a couple of them that had a chip on their shoulder, but it wasn't a thing they could do about it, though.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think you mentioned to me earlier that when you came to the fire department, you were doing some other things. Is that right? You had another job. When you first came in, you had another job, or you were doing something else at that time?
Well, see, when I was going to City College, I took a course in a real estate and insurance. And so just before I got out of the service, my mother sent me my real estate books. And so in 1946, I took the real estate examination, and I became a real estate broker. And I was a real estate broker when I went into the fire department. And so on my days off, I worked in a real estate office. I worked with Urban Investment Company out there on Adeline Street. And Ted Hardiman was the guy in charge out there. And the company was owned by the Paramount 7. And they owned Transbay Bank, and they also owned Urban Investment Company. And that was Slim Jenkins, Jeff Beavers, Dr. Foster, George Vons. It was a group. There was 7 of them, you know. But they owned the bank, Transbay Bank, and they also owned Urban Investment Company. And then in the early 50s, we built a tract of homes up in Pittsburgh for blacks. We built 105 homes up there in Pittsburgh, and I was in charge of that. And then after we finished that, we built 48 homes in Benicia on Carquinez Way. And then the last tract we built was out in Hayward on, it's off of Kelly and Maud. It's on Hardeman Street. And that was my boss's name, was Hardeman. We built those out there, plus a number of individual homes around the Bay Area.
So most of those were for blacks, or?
Oh yeah, they were for blacks, yeah. Because you know the whites didn't want to move in the same place we were living. Mm-hmm.
So now, since you were the first black chief in Oakland, have there been any other black chiefs since you?
Oh yes, as a matter of fact, my deputy chief, I groomed him to take my place when I left, and that was Godwin Taylor. He took my place. As a matter of fact, the city manager asked me to recommend somebody, and I recommended him, and that's the only person I recommended, and that's the only person that the city manager interviewed, and he got the job after me.
Has anyone else been, any other black fire chiefs?
Yeah, after Godwin was there for about 4 years, then the city manager decided to go nationwide for the next chief, and they got a guy out of Virginia. He was originally out of Compton. His name was Lamont Ewell. He came out here, and Lamont used to call me almost every day, wanted me to put in a good word for him, and I did, you know. But it was also at that same time when some of the Hispanics in the department were upset because they said they didn't get a fair shake at the job. And so Elihu Harris was the mayor at that time, and so he asked the city manager to open it up again. And he did. And so there was a couple guys from New York and a couple guys from Cleveland that had applied. And the city manager asked me to check them out for him, which I did, because I had a lot of connections in New York and those other places. And I gave him my recommendations, and Lamont Ewell was appointed as the chief after Godwin.
In 1981, when you were the fire chief here in Oakland, were there many other black fire chiefs, say in California?
No. There was Jim Shern, who was the chief in Pasadena, and there was Monroe Smith, who was the chief in Compton.
And how about throughout the rest of the country?
There wasn't too many throughout the country. New York had a fire commissioner who was black at that time, and that was about it.
Do you know who actually was the first black fire chief of any fire department in the country?
Jim Shern, out of Pasadena.
And when was that?
That was back in the 70s. He became chief. He came from the Los Angeles Fire Department and became chief of the Pasadena Fire Department. It's ironic because the Pasadena Fire Department was just about all white, and they selected him to be the chief. Yeah. Well, he knew his job.
So you, if you look at your selection in terms of the whole nation, you were one of the first black fire chiefs.
One of the few, yeah, because there weren't too many. Then shortly after that, a number of other cities began to get chief officers also.
So before your friend told you about the exam and all, did you have any aspirations about being a fireman at all?
Oh no. I took that examination because the job paid more than what I was making. I had never been inside a firehouse before I went there for those classes.
Is that right?
I didn't even know what a firehouse looked like.
Did you, before that time, did you think you were going to do something in business, or is that where you were thinking you were going?
Yeah, I was thinking about real estate, really. That's what I was thinking about.
Real estate. Yeah. So when you got into it, was there something about it that made you decide to really push and go as far as you can? Was there something about the whole idea of being a fireman that sparked you and made you continue?
One of the reasons was because it was it was a good paying job, and it paid enough for me to support my family, you know, and do the things that I wanted to. And that's why I wanted to stick with it. And like I said earlier, that I was hoping that I could, you know, make lieutenant one day, you know. But I was fortunate enough to go a little higher than that.
So you mentioned your family now.
Mhm.
When did you get married?
January 1st, 1943. Been married 61 years.
61 years.
Mhm.
You have children?
I had 2 girls and a boy. My boy passed away when he was 15. The 2 girls are still living here in Oakland. I got 4 granddaughters. I got 7 great-grands.
Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that everything has been nice for you. Is that correct?
Oh yes, it's been very.
You've enjoyed being your time here in Oakland.
Oh yes, I've been here so long. You know.
Do you remember much about your earlier days of? I guess you left Albuquerque when you were so young that you may not remember
But
that.
that's the only thing that I remember about Albuquerque was that, see, my brother started school there in Albuquerque, and I used to go to school with him sometimes, and most of the population was Hispanic, and they used to chase us home all the time, you know. And my mother would look up and we'd come running down the road, and she'd have to take us back to school. Yeah. But see, at that time, I was only about 4 years old, and my brother was, he was almost 6.
Right.
Yeah.
So now, when you were here, did you attend church? Did you belong to a church here in Oakland?
Yes, North Oakland Baptist Church.
Oakland
Yeah.
Baptist Church. Were you involved in the church?
I was involved with the church. They had what they call the BYPU, you know, for young kids. I was involved with that for quite a while until Reverend Coleman, who was the pastor there, he passed away. Then the next pastor came in, and he was not really interested in the kids, you know. And that's when I sort of dropped out, and I went to other churches. And then a friend of mine was dating a young lady whose father was a pastor, and they had a church over on Fairview Street off of King. So I started going to that church because he was going there to see his girlfriend. I started going there, that church. Mm-hmm.
How about, were you involved in the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or the Y or any of those organizations?
Yes, I was involved with the Boy Scouts for a brief period of time at Clawson School. They used to meet there in the evenings. And I was involved with the Y well, the Y was sort of segregated at that time too. It was on 36th Street between Market and West, the first building that they had.
Is there anything, what's there now?
That's a house there now. No, they moved the Y over to Brockhurst and Market on the corner there. But anyway, back in the 30s, it was the first director there, his name was Smith. And then, what's Virginia's husband's name? He was a councilman in Oakland. I can't think of it. He was the first black councilman that we had here in Oakland. But anyway, he came out here, and he was the director of the Y that they had there. And they had a number of programs for the WPA. And one of the programs that they had there was teaching dancing, tap dancing. And a fellow by the name of Freddie McWilliams was teaching dancing there. And there was a group of us who were taking the dancing lessons there. And we ended up dancing professionally, you know, not I mean, at different functions.
What about you like to dance, I assume, then?
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, there was 6 of us, and we danced over at the Palace Hotel for 6 years in San Francisco. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Until the lady, her name was Mrs. Terrell. I asked her how much they were paying her for us, and she got a little mad at me and said, "It's a good thing your mother loves you, because I don't."
Oh, is that right?
Mrs. Terrell.
Was Josh Rose involved in any of this at that time?
Oh yeah, Josh was in charge of the Y at that time. Josh Rose, yeah, he was in charge of the Y there, and he had all these various programs, and he also had a program for high school kids, and there was a club that we belonged to. It's called the Esquire 12. There was 12 of us in the club, and we were all from different schools around here.
Any other members of your family involved in the fire department at all?
Yes, my brother. I got him involved in the fire department. He's a electrician, and he worked at Mare Island. and he used to wire all the submarines that they had up there, but they kept laying him off. But every time that they ran into a problem, because somebody didn't know how to make a four-way switch, they would call him back. And so they called him back, and he'd work there for maybe a year, and they would lay him off again. Now, he had more seniority than all the whites there, but they kept laying him off. And so I convinced him to come into the fire department. And he came in about 1952 or 53, somewhere around there.
And did he stay for?
Oh, yeah, he stayed, and he reached the rank of lieutenant, and he got injured at a fire, and he retired on a disability.
I see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's the only, and no other members of your...
No other members of my family, no. Mm-hmm.
So did you continue to dance afterwards, after you did the semi-professional dancing?
No, from the time that I went in the service, I stopped dancing. And when I went in the service in 43, I didn't dance anymore.
Well, social dancing?
Social dancing, yes. Mm-hmm.
But that was your professional stint.
That was different, yeah. I wouldn't really say I'm a professional. We got paid, you know, but we weren't all that good.
Semi-professional.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything else that that I should know, or anything of interest that you want to tell me?
I can't think of anything right now.
Have you had any kind of, have you had some people or one person who's been a role model or who's inspired you, or given you words that you have kind of lived by or have remembered?
Well, when we were having problems in the fire department, C.L. Dellums used to come by, and he would talk to us. And he told us to get involved with the union. He said, if you're involved with the union, they don't dare pass any laws or regulations that affect you. And I found that to be true. And while I was involved with the union, they had a different attitude.
I realized that when you were coming in, there'd been some before you, and segregation was still present. Was there anything that you had from your childhood or from your parents that made you persevere, especially going through the ranks, understanding that there was segregation and that sort of thing?
Well, my mother and dad was big on education, and they sort of drummed it into my brother and I, you know, to get a good education. And at the time that they were talking about, high school was the goal, you know, to get a high school education. But then after that, it was a college education. Now I think you need a master's or a PhD, really, you know, to get a halfway decent job.
I see. Mm-hmm. Well, have you ever thought about writing your story, or some kind of way chronicalizing all the things that have happened to you?
My wife has been on my back for the last, I guess, 15 years for me to write my story. I guess I'm too lazy. I haven't started writing it yet.
So you haven't started writing
No.
it? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure there are a lot of people who would like to see it in print and would like to follow your story.
Yeah.
I see you have some interesting photos. Won't you please identify them?
Well, this first photo here is a picture of my brother and myself. I was about 4 years old at that time, and my brother was around 6. And we lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And my folks moved there in 1922. My dad was a World War I veteran, and he homesteaded about 1,000 acres there. And after we came to California, the Army built a airfield there on our property.
And the next photo?
That's the picture when I graduated from high school in June of 1940. I was happy to get out of high school.
Was that the style then? Notice that tie.
Well, I don't know if it was the style then, but that's all I could afford.
And the next photo?
That's a picture of me when I became chief of the department in Oakland. That was in 1981.
Well, Mr. Goldman, the Coalition is proud to honor you as one of the historians in the program Eternal Voices, 28th of March, 2004.